Hey gang, Volty here doing another post-match commentary from last week's Plenty of Games Winner Library event. Here we have the first of two semi-finals. On the left we have Jack Ding on Sultai Reanimator, sorry. And on the right we have Riley Jones on Lutri Grixis. If I remember correctly, this was one side of the bracket and Jack had the play. So we'll do some commentary of the match and we'll see how it played out. This matchup is it's pretty close. This is going to play out pretty similarly to Riley's match against Cody, which was a quarterfinals that was on coverage. And that was Gorgeous Reanimator versus Grixis. Functionally, there aren't too many differences between Jack's build and a typical Gorgeous Reanimator deck, other than that some of his threats are a little bit different. So, notably by having a couple of extra threats that can win the game by themselves and are a little bit more castable, World Gorgeous Dragon notably being pretty much impossible to cast from Sultai. Although I don't expect that to come up. I would say that this matchup is going to play out pretty similarly. So the basic breakdown is that Riley on Grixis in Game 1 has access to a little bit of Graveyard Hate, stack interaction, and hand interaction, but the pressure that Grixis can put on is pretty minimal when it comes to the early turns. So it can turn the corner very quickly, spend 1 mana to play a Gomag Angler, that sort of thing, but it's not it's not able to win the game by turn 3 or turn 4. And from Jack's side, the current builds of Reanimator are very interactive. They have a lot of counter magic, they have a lot of discard spells, and a couple of removal spells. So here we can see that Riley is casting an Inquisition on turn 1. He's going to take Psychic Frog, which is just the best card in Jack's hand. Although I could see reason to take Brainstorm here. I think Careful Study and VT and the other cantrip, I think it was a Preordain. All of those are definitely going to be worse than Brainstorm or than Frog. And so now, one of the interesting things from the Reanimator side of the matchup is that depending on what plan you go for, your opponent may have some bits of interaction that they otherwise wouldn't have access to. So if you decide to search with Mystical Tutor or for Vampiric Tutor for the card Reanimate, then it's much worse against something like Mental Misstep, and you can get burnt out. If you go for something like Animate Dead or Dance of the Dead, then you're likely going to have less mana, and something like Spell Pierce or Daze might get you. So in terms of sculpting the hand, it's very important to make educated guesses on what interaction your opponent has access to, based off of what they've been doing. So really going to follow up the Inquisition on turn 1 with a Thoughtseize. Jack resolved a Careful Study, so he has quite a couple of new cards that might be Thoughtseizable here. And interestingly, he's firing off a Vampiric Shooter in response to Thoughtseize and letting it resolve. We know that he would have had the option to cast Brainstorm in response to Thoughtseize, so I think he's really valuing just trying to get on the board, and I would be shocked if the top card wasn't a Metamorphosis Fanatic. So it has a hand of Brainstorm, Misstep, and I think that's a Necromancy. I think it's a Misstep, and I'm surprised he didn't fire it off on Thoughtseize here. Because if you cast Metamorphosis off the top to bring back your Frog, Misstep doesn't protect you against any of the counter magic that Riley would have access to. To counter a Metamorphosis, it would basically be Force of Will or Daze in this spot. So it's possible he got something else. So Riley's going to Thoughtseize the Necromancy, just get 1 card towards Jack's plan out of his hand. I think I would have preferred taking Brainstorm. It was Metamorphosis. And he saved the misstep and countered, I think, a Tameo. So we have a Fanatic and a Frog. The Frog has Lifelink, which is relatively non-important. I think that Skull counter is to denote Lifelink here. So Riley's Ponder found a push, so he can push the Frog. And beating the 4-4 isn't too difficult. So push gonna resolve, Frog gonna go to the graveyard. This 4-4 is gonna connect probably twice at a guess. It's definitely gonna connect once. Riley's hand, a little bit soft. I think he has Force Blue card at the moment. And I think I saw a Colligan's Command, which doesn't have too much text here. Pretty interesting that Jack, in that earlier turn, saved the misstep instead of misstepping Thoughtseize. Especially once the VT resolved and he didn't have to misstep a misstep to protect it. So Go Meg Angler gonna come down here. It's a pretty big deal. It fogs the Fanatic. And it means both players have access to several draw steps here. Jack didn't fetch end of turn, so he wanted to keep the card he knew about from Brainstorm. Possibly kept it safe from a discard spell, so it might be a Cameo or an Oculus or something. Some kind of castable threat. It could also just be like an Animate Dead for the Psychic Frog. But not fetching for a Surveil means that he definitely wanted to keep a card. Oh, it is Oculus. Okay. Yeah, so he definitely wanted to keep a card from the Brainstorm, because he was light on cards in hand, so he probably couldn't get rid of a full suite. So Riley just gonna force the Oculus. Thought about casting Consider there, but I definitely think we don't take the gamble, because I don't know how you're beating Oculus. So he has access to Colligan's Command, which doesn't do anything. He has access to buying Lutri, but we're gonna pick up and fire off a Preordain here. Looks like a Bauble and a land, and he's taking the land so he can pick up Lutri here. He has nothing in the graveyard to pick up with Colligan's Command, so I imagine he's just gonna buy Lutri. Interesting that he would keep a Bloodstain Mire. Not being able to get Mystic Sanctuary, I think I'd dig for a different card there. But I guess if you can get to 4 mana, it lets you Lutri Cantrip. And if you get to 5 mana, you can Lutri Counterspell. The board is at a pretty weird state of parity here. We have a 4-4 lifelinker, which means the Go Meg Angler can't race even though it's bigger, but because it can't attack, the 4-4 can't attack. And both players' hands are just kind of refilling with stuff after the early game where they both got pretty close to Hellbent really quickly. Riley draws an Oculus, isn't able to cast it. So likely just going to ship the turn here. Jack going to fetch a Hedge Maze and Surveil. He doesn't really need to find a big creature. I mean, if he does, he's going to put it in the graveyard, but I think he's just looking for action here. Reanimation spell is good. Cantrips are good. Thoughtseize's effects aren't great here. He's going to keep it on top. I imagine if he's found a reanimation spell, he's pretty heavily incentivized to just go for it. I mean, Riley has 2 unknowns. The odds that one's a counterspell is definitely not 0, but we've seen Force. I believe we've seen Misstep. What is that? Is that Exhume? I think it's Exhume. And I think Riley chose discard. I discard a card to bring back his Oculus with Exhume because he didn't have any creatures in graveyard. That's a very heads-up play. Super easy to miss that. And they recorded life total changes, so presumably he just went face for 2 damage there. So now Jack is going to manifest first. Riley, I don't think, wants to attack with Oculus. Although, no, you can't offer the trade. Because I think his life total must be quite a bit lower. And I think Jack would just let it go through and decide to ship in a race. Draws a Git Probe, cycling it. So the question is, if you're Jack, do you crack him with the Oculus? Riley is heavily incentivized to block. I think if you're... So here's the thing. Riley's playing Grixis and all of his threats are castable, which means anything he manifests has the chance of being a real creature, like a Netherglyph or a Baraglyph, and anything Jack manifests is much less likely to be a real creature. And I think that might actually be enough for him to ship in there and encourage a trade. Because the thing with manifesting is that you get to look at a bunch of cards, but none of them go to your hand, and you can't sculpt a draw step. So it is meaningless. So I guess we've reached a point now where... I mean, Jack is able to hardcast some of his threats. Troll of Khazad-dûm and Generous Ent come to mind as castable threats. Both players have access to 5+ mana, which means they can, do things like hardcast Lorien Revealed, which they're almost certainly both playing. At no point has Riley presented Graveyard Hate, which I think is pretty notable. I think I would have preferred cracking the Bauble in your own turn there. You have a lot of live draws to protect yourself this turn, because you are face up. And you can draw Counterspell or Drown in the Lock or something. So I think I prefer cracking Bauble in your own turn, but... Because the thing is, if you're trying to protect your draw step from like a discard spell, you still have Lutri in hand. So you either have to commit it to the board for no value or just move on. Gomag actually going to crack in and go unblocked. I think Riley drew a Bolt, so he has access to Bolt Lutri. And that's why he's making this play. There's just like no blocks or double blocks. And we're going to ship it in, kill the face down creature, kill Deathrite. And now Riley is firmly ahead. He's still dead to a bunch of different top decks. I mean, if If Jack can reanimate the Valgavoth in his graveyard, the game's just over. And now that the dust is settled, I mean, it's Gurmag Angler and some random cards versus some random cards. I don't know how many turns it'll take for Gurmag Angler to kill Jack in this spot. I believe he connected with Fnatic twice. So he's pretty healthy. But I think now it's just a matter of who draws action first. If neither player draws anything meaningful, then obviously the Gurmag Angler will get out. Bone Shards targeting Angler, gets misstepped, and we're going to pack it up. So I guess that attack was going to be the lethal one. So Riley going to take game 1 here. There's a very important game for him to take. I would say game 1 is the hardest game for him to win. The Reanimator deck has a little bit of a natural edge. I would say that Grixis is definitely one of its harder matchups in game 1 across the entire spectrum of the format. But from the Grixis side, it's definitely not an easy matchup to win game 1. I mean, you have so many bricks. You only have 2, maybe 3 bits of graveyard hate, like a Cling and a Douthie and a Deathray Shaman. Postboard, Jack probably going to bring in maybe 4 5 cards. I expect a Carpet to come in. I expect maybe a bit of Graveyard Hate if it's pretty clean, so like Nihil, Spellbomb, or Leyline maybe. Decay will almost certainly come in, I would say. And from Riley's side, he has access to 2 Rebs, maybe a 4th or 5th discard spell, a couple of bits of Graveyard Hate like Nihil, Spellbomb, Ghost Vacuum, Unlicensed Her, something like that. But otherwise, I would say both players going to sideboard pretty light here. I would expect a max of 5 or 6 cards. Not sure what's happening on Riley's end. Might be asking a judge a question here. Might be asking past me a question. I don't remember very well. Yeah, this matchup's super intricate. I think it's probably... It's probably one of the closest matchups to a 50-50 outside of mirrors in the format. You both have just enough interaction to make it like really close and really interesting. And player skill is a huge factor. It's very easy for Grixis to get ahead and then throw the position. It's very easy for the Reanimator deck to either be too gung-ho or too shy. You really need to ride that middle ground, because if you go for it too quickly, you're probably spending a bunch of resources and you can just get caught out by a Spell Pierce. And if you're waiting too long, then you're giving Grixis the chance to build up a critical mass of resources and mana. In saying that, both of these players are excellent Magic players. And so I think this actual matchup is probably really close to 50-50. And I think that was true for the quarterfinals between Corey and Riley as well. It's not quite a perfect information, the better player wins every single time. There is a lot of variance that's available in this kind of matchup. Grixis can easily just draw too many interactive pieces and die to show and tell. They can draw too much counter magic and die to a really quick Thoughtseize plus kill you. Jack gonna lead with Bizarre Go. I mean, we see an Entomb in hand. Bit surprised that he would take a turn off making mana. I don't know how often you actually want to activate Bizarre in this matchup. I think it probably meant to side it out. It's not that difficult to get creatures into your graveyard. And that's also not really what the matchup is about. Like, you don't need to get creatures into your graveyard really, really quickly at the cost of resources. So I think I'd prefer to side out Bizarre in this matchup. I think having access to all your mana is a bit too important. Unless Jack's take on the matchup is to just be faster and hope that he strands Riley in hand with, a couple of removal spells and counter magic, and he just forces through something. I guess if that's your approach, then this line makes perfect sense. But I don't know. If you wanna take it a bit slower, I think I like siding out Bizarre and maybe even siding out Entomb. Entomb is very good when you need a specific threat in a particular matchup. But with how the Reanimator decks are built at the moment, I don't actually think it matters what creature is in your graveyard. And I also don't think it really matters when a creature is in your graveyard. Because you have to kind of beat through a bunch of things first anyway. Riley gonna follow up a turn 1 Nihil with, by the looks of it, a Thoughtseize. That's a duress, sure. Based off Jack's hand, duress is gonna resolve here. I can't imagine he's gonna activate Bizarre this turn. I can't imagine he's meant to activate Bizarre ever again. You're just going down way too many resources. And you actually can brute force through the Grixis interactive suite if you have your own interaction. This particular hand's kind of rancid. Looks like a Dark Rit, Troll, Oculus, Fanatic, Consider. I think you take Consider. Dark Rit's not worth a card. And then you just counter the first thing that he does. Jack and a Swarm Cycle. Go get his C. I guess he's probably incentivized to try and stick an Oculus here. I can't imagine he's activating Bizarre. He might get Sewers, actually. I think that's what he's currently debating. If you're not planning on firing off Dark Rit Oculus, then I guess you get Sewers. And you just try and hit your land drops naturally. And this is what I mean by having the Bizarre, right? Is that Jack had the play because he lost game 1, but he skipped his first land drop. And so he's currently down 2 mana and up 1 Bizarre activation. He hasn't been able to activate it a second time to generate some tempo because he would just lose the game and be way too far behind. I mean, it also depends on how many playable cards Jack would have had access to in the sideboard. He just might not have been able to trim enough. I'm really going to crack Nihil in response to a fetch to stop Oculus. And this is a pretty big red flag if you're on Jack's side. Riley very clearly doesn't have a counterspell for an Oculus. And we can see he has a Drown in the lock in hand, which does not work against Oculus. And because the Nihil got cracked in response to the fetch, Jack was able to pivot and get a Surveil land instead. Nothing either player could do to adjust in that spot. That pivot is just always available to Jack, and Riley can never do anything about it if he's going to commit to checking Oculus that way. And his hand's pretty medium. He has a Submerge, which is okay. Checks something like a Troll. He has a Misstep. But I mean, he doesn't have a threat. He blew up his Graveyard Hate. He found an Angler. Okay. Well, at the very least, he's got something going. I think we're now reaching a stage where Jack probably has to activate Bazaar again and start digging. But I don't know how meaningful that is. This Baraglyph is a 0-1. Both graveyards have been completely wiped off the map. So no reason to submerge the Baraglyph to force the Angler through. It's just a 0-1, it has nothing going. I think I wouldn't have minded submerging Baraglyph in response to Bazaar, because I think it's just a card that you're fine with Jack drawing. And now, because you waited on the Submerge, and Jack doesn't want to redraw it because it's kind of anemic on this board state, if he finds a shuffle effect, like a land cycler or a fetch land, he can get rid of the Baraglyph. So I think I prefer submerging Baraglyph in response to Bazaar, but it's pretty minor. And his hand looks a little light anyway. That being said, I think Riley was meant to buy Lutri last turn. I think he could have managed perfectly fine on 2 mana. Because he has like a Drown, a Misstep, and a Submerge, which is 2 total mana for 3 bits of interaction. Jack finally resolving Bazaar, bins Oculus, Darkrit, Fanatic, and finds a fetch land. So we can see here that Jack can shuffle away the Baraglyph if he wants to, purely because of that timing. And I think if you submerge the Baraglyph in response to Bazaar and Jack redeploys it, I think that's perfectly fine for you. It's going to be very interesting to see if Jack keeps this. So what's currently happening is maybe Jack has a bit of interaction and he's working out if he wants to counter the Submerge. But more importantly, if he wants to have access to 4 mana, he needs to fetch in response to Baraglyph, in response to Submerge if he wants to keep the Baraglyph. If he doesn't want to keep the Baraglyph, he lets the Submerge resolve and then shuffles it away. And that was that decision point. So he's clearly decided that he wants to draw Baraglyph next turn, which I think is reasonable in this spot. It's a clean answer to Gurmag Angler. And we're seeing Dance of the Dead targeting Fanatic. It's getting drowned. That's resolving. And then reanimate target Fnatic, which is getting misstepped. Yeah, I think Riley been musing that he that he could have got Lutri. Looks like he thought seized Jack and got rid of the Barragoth and is now putting Drown on top. The issue with buying Lutri is that you don't get the Sanctuary because he didn't have any spells in Graveyard. But I think it still would have been fine to pick it up. Here, Riley has a Drown to protect himself. He has the board. Jack's down a mana. So I expect this game to last maybe 2 more turns. And Riley should be able to lock this up. I think it'd be pretty hard to lose this game. Just gonna let the frog resolve. I think that's fine. You have more cards in hand. I think you have to let this through, right? I don't think you can afford to block with frog here. Oh, he's willing to just trade cards? Okay. So Riley's frog is going to win this combat. He's going to get 5 damage in. He's not going to draw an extra card. And I believe Jack is currently working out how many cards, if any, he wants to exile with Psychic Frog to give it flying. Now, it isn't going to keep it alive in this combat, but if he can get his graveyard low enough, he can check the Drown in the lock, and Riley is face up here. Activating Bazaar. Oh, it's just to mill 2 cards to make his graveyard multiples of 3. Sure. That's cute. So this leaves him with 2 cards in graveyard. I think this is kind of meaningless though, because the Psychic Frog is dying in combat, which means you go up to 3, and I think everything you could cast is 3 mana. That matters. If the Psychic Frog didn't go to graveyard, and you could have 2 cards, you'd have Necromancy as an out. But Riley gonna win that, gonna clean it up, 2-0. I think there are a couple of decision points that I disagreed on from both sides, but they were pretty minor. And overall, I think it was well played, and it was just a matter of Grixis having slightly more than it needed, and Jack breaking out a little bit too often in Game 1, and being down a couple of critical resources in Game 2. But GG's, this is going to put Riley in the finals, and next match should be the other semi-finals. So we'll see you then.